Hey everyone, this is Greg Smith from BoostBySmith. I was going to take a few minutes and talk to you a little bit about MaxxECU and some of the differences between the different ECUs that I have lined up here. I've got a mini, street, sport, and race. Not in the video are Gen 2 race and the MaxxECU Pro. Both of those are a bit much for a street bike, so we'll kind of focus on these. I'll start off by saying the Sport is by far the most popular ECU that I work with. But I'll go through the different ECUs, talk about inputs and outputs, what some of the ECUs can do that others can't, and kind of go from there. So to start off, M-Tune software, the MaxxECU software that you use for setup, tuning, configuration, and all that, it doesn't restrict you based upon ECU type. You can do any feature on any ECU provided that you have the inputs and the outputs available to do it. When I talk about inputs, I mean things like sensors, a throttle position sensor, a gear position sensor, a wheel speed sensor, a flex fuel sensor, pressure sensors, quick shifter, temperature sensors. This is a coolant, air intake temperature, a button, a switch. Those are things that the ECU is reading what the rider or the bike is doing. Then you have outputs. So for an output, you've got things like a relay for fan relay, fuel pump relay, solid state relay for nitrous control, air shifter solenoid, boost control solenoid, injector, idle air control valve. Things like that are outputs that you want to control. So if you look at the different ECUs, the Mini by far has the least amount of inputs and outputs. And in this lineup, the Race has the most. And it's kind of what do you want to do with the ECU that dictates which one is the correct one for you. So if we talk about wideband O2 or a lambda sensor, everything except for the Mini has a wideband controller built inside of it. The Mini, in order to do closed-loop fuel control and to be able to see air fuel or lambda, you either need a CAN lambda adapter that they have here that gets wired in, or you can use other ones like an AEM or something like that over CAN bus, and you can also use an analog output and wire that to one of the inputs on the ECU. So again, this one does not have a controller built in, where these all do. Now next up, we'll talk about dash options real quick here. Now any system that I make a plug and play for, the stock dash can be functional. So this is a Gen 1 Hayabusa dash. The ECU controls the tach. The speedometer is connected directly to the gauge cluster, and then the coolant FI light, and then if it's a Gen 2 or a GSXR 1000, the gear indicator and the ABC modes I control over serial with a controller that's inside of my box. So all of the ECUs I can do a stock dash with. Now, a digital dash, something like a next gen EFI, the digital dash that I sometimes do, this is a Race Technology dash, an AEM CD5. This is also a next gen EFI dash. Those are traditionally CAN bus based. All of the ECUs have CAN bus, so you could use any of those dashes on any of those ECUs. Now, the one differentiation that I have here is now I've got a phone out with an M-Dash app that you can use Bluetooth to connect to the ECU. The Mini does not have Bluetooth. The Street does not have Bluetooth. The Sport and the Race both do, and you can see the Bluetooth antenna here. So if you want to run a tablet or a phone as either a dash or an auxiliary dash, you can do things with Bluetooth buttons to start the bike and change boost levels and things like that. That's possible provided that you're using a Sport or a Race. If we look at injector drivers, the injector driver number of injector drivers is different for each ECU. The Mini has 4, the Street and the Sport both have 6, and the Race has 8. Now there are options. You can run an 8-injector bike off of a Mini. You can run an 8-injector bike off of a Sport and a Street. And you certainly can do that on a Race because it has 8-injector outputs. On a Mini, you would have to batch fire injectors 1 and 4 on the primary, 2 and 3, 1 and 4 on one injector, 2 and 3 on another injector. the secondary injectors 1 and 4 on an injector driver, and then the other 2. So you can't do full sequential injection on a Mini with 8 injectors. On a street and sport, normally you do sequential, so you do 1-to-1 injector per driver on the primary injectors, and the secondary injectors get paired up. So injector 5 and 6 outputs on both of these ECUs, normally you wire to the secondary injector 1-4 and then 2-3. On the race, it's just 1-to-1 relationship there. Both of these guys, if you wanted to run full sequential injection, you can use a couple of the spare low side drivers in order to serve as injector drivers. So on this one, you can use 6 injector drivers plus general purpose output 1 and 2. You can do the same on both of these to have full sequential on this ECU. Now that's going to limit the other things that you can drive, like solenoids or solid state relays or things of that nature. But by and large, again, like I said before, the Sport's the most popular ECU that I work with, and most of the bikes that I'm working with these days are 8 injectors. So Gen 3 Hayabusa, Gen 2 Hayabusa, 2017 and newer GSXR 1000, the K7 to the 2007 GSXR 1000, 8 injector as well. ZX14 only has 4 injector outputs, so you can kind of lean towards some of the lesser expensive ECUs in order to work on that bike. If we talk about throttle type, so any of the older bikes that have a cable throttle, all your ZX14s, your Gen 1 Hayabusa, your 2007 GSXR 1000, those you can use a Mini and a street on. If your bike has drive-by-wire, 2017 GSXR 1000 or Gen 3 Hayabusa or M8 Harley, those all have a throttle servo valve here, which requires a couple of outputs that are unique to the Sport and the race. So a Gen 3 Busa, 2017 GSXR 1000 is a full standalone system. You cannot use a Mini or a street. You have to use the Sport or the race. Now, obviously looking at the size, putting this in the tail section, stock tail section of a GSXR 1000, good luck. A Sport fits, sort of barely. All right, something else that kind of sets the different ECUs apart. The race has EGT inputs, so exhaust gas temperature, K-type thermocouple inputs. So if you want to run a thermocouple in each header pipe to be able to look at cylinder to cylinder balance, that would require the race ECU as far as the inputs that are built into the ECU without going to a separate standalone EGT controller and bring it in over CAN bus. Okay, bikes that have a idle air control valve that is 4-wire, such as the ZX14, Gen 2 Busa, 2007 and 8 GSXR 1000. In order to control this directly with a Max, it actually requires a race. The Sport does not have the drivers in it to do a 4-wire idle stepper controller. Most guys don't go for that and will just adjust their throttle and deal without having the idle air control valve. In the event that you do want to go with a lesser ECU and still have idle air control valve on your Gen 2 Busa, I do make a standalone controller that will interface with any of the MaxxECUs and requires basically one output pin, 12 volt and ground, and it can control the idle air control valve directly. 4-wire stepper controller for idle, the same type of thing as on a Gen 2 Busa and a Gen 2 ZX14 for the secondary throttle plates. If you wanted to control those, you definitely want the race. The Sport ECU cannot handle driving the secondary throttle blades. Most people just pull them out. I've actually never wired secondary throttle plates for anyone as of yet, but maybe one day we will. You certainly could wire these to close off for power reduction, kind of how Suzuki uses them. So that's kind of a general rundown. Again, so I mentioned, basically think about your MaxxECU Mini kind of being, the least capable, and in this lineup anyway, the race kind of being the most capable. It really depends on how many sensors you want to take in. So fuel pressure, oil pressure, flex fuel, quick shifter, additional air temperature sensors, air shifter, shift light, things like that. you're going to run out of available inputs and outputs on a Mini really quickly. Again, it kind of depends on the bike. I've done some turbo Gen 1 Boosas on Minis that can work pretty good if you've only got 4 injectors on that bike. You want to run a fuel pressure sensor maybe and a single solenoid valve for boost control. You can certainly do that with a Mini. You can do stock ECU replacement stuff with a Mini pretty easily. A street works pretty damn good on a Gen 1, Gen 2 Boosa, Gen 1, Gen 2 ZX14, K7 GSXR 1000. Again, Gen 3 Boosa, 2017 GSXR 1000 with drive-by-wire. You definitely need the Sport or the Race. So if you have questions about what all you want to run on the bike and what ECU that will fit in, you can certainly contact me. Again, generally speaking, for the full-blown, you're trying to put 100 pounds of wiring and sensors on the bike, you probably want the Race. 90% of the work that I do is with the MaxxECU Sport, and I do some streets, some minis, some races. This is an old harness that I have here, but to show you how my systems work, I don't do full custom replacement harnesses. I interface with the factory harness on the bike. So in this case, my harness plugs into the MaxxECU. Then it's got this 48-pin connector that will plug into one of the boxes that I make. This is a Gen 1 Hayabusa version here. This one looks similar, but the input connector is different. This is for a 2021 to 2023 M8 Harley. But essentially, this harness plugs into the box. The box plugs into the bike through the factory ECU connectors. So now you're connected to the dash. You're connected to the CAN bus system if there is one on the bike. You're connected to the injectors. You're connected to the throttle position sensor, the coolant temp, intake air temp, gear position sensor, all of that stuff. I have a relay that goes with wiring to the battery. And then you've got an ignition igniter here. I don't have one sitting on this harness at the moment, but I do make those now as well. So this is a John Gover 239 Innovations LLC product that he designed, I build, called White Lightning. And this is a 4-channel ignition igniter. So essentially that would plug in. Basically you plug this box in, takes you 5-10 minutes literally to just connect a couple of wires and get the stuff placed onto the bike. And you can be up and running to replace your stock ECU, but with wideband O2 control, with safeties if you have fuel pressure, oil pressure, things like that, oil pressure safety cut, lean air fuel cut, boost cut if it's a turbo bike. Then, to wire in additional sensors, I have this 34-pin connector that, depending on the box, it might be on the side or on the back. And all of the spare inputs and outputs are available here. So we've got 12-volt ground, 5-volt sensor ground, all the analog inputs, digital inputs, low side and high side drivers that are available to turn on your nitrous, your air shifter, your boost control. All that stuff is done through this connector, and I will custom build you a harness that has all of those inputs and outputs, as well as you can do that yourself down the road if you need to add something. So that ended up being way more long-winded than I had anticipated, which is pretty much how I typically operate. But hopefully this helps provide a little bit of insight to sort of how I do my systems and some of the differences between the different ECUs and their capabilities. I'm sure I probably missed a couple of things that as soon as I stop the video, I'll wish I could go back in and edit it. But we'll start for this for now and see how that works. Thanks for your time.